I want to welcome everyone here to the University of Tulsa College of Law. My name is Janet Levitt. I'm the dean, and this is the first of what will be about 6 or 7 of our faculty and alumni showcase series presentations throughout the year, where we really are excited to welcome alumni back to campus and to welcome members of the community to our campus, and to learn about a variety of subjects and also receive some CLE credit and a sandwich and just sort of enjoy all being together to explore a variety of areas. So today we're very, very pleased to have Jeff Vandolah, who became the fire chief in Broken Arrow in April 2011. He started his career in the Broken Arrow Fire Department in 1984 and then was with the Tulsa Fire Department. He received his law degree from the University of Tulsa in 1992 and also his BA from the University of Tulsa in 1988. He's been an instructor for the National Fire Academy and for Tulsa Community College. And he's going to talk to us today about expert witnesses, forensic evidence, particularly in arson cases. I think all of us, well, particularly I drive down Lewis every day to get to work, and about a week and a half ago, my husband, I woke up and he said, "Oh my gosh, all my Facebook friends from Barnard Elementary, which is where he went, we have just had a major fire. Who exactly knows what the cause is now, but when you drive by that, you realize just what a tremendous service people like Jeff and those that work for him provide for us, and also how interesting it is to really think about the forensic and the evidentiary side about what they may find and what they can discover when they are dealing with fires, particularly arson. So Jeff, welcome back. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I'll give you a little bit of background of kind of how I got here today. I started in the fire service in 1984. I've always loved the fire service. It's been very good to me. Enjoy what I get back from that, helping others. But somewhere after I got started in '84, I wanted and had a desire to go to law school, and fortunately I was able to go to the night program here, and I don't know if there's any others that attended the night program here, but they have a 4-year night program, and I was able to do that from 1988 through '92. Staying with the fire service, I've never left it. I've been there for nearly 29 years, and I've done several different things along that in that time. The nice thing about the fire service is it has varied places that you can spend your time. Not only fire suppression, which you see the fire trucks and stuff. You have the fire marshal's office. You have public education. You have code officers. You have training officers. So it's varied in what you can do. My time in Tulsa, I spent about 11 or 12 years in Broken Arrow, and then was lucky enough to move to Tulsa, where there were some good opportunities that Broken Arrow didn't have at the time. And during that time, I spent about 12 years in the fire marshal's office, and all of that time I spent as an investigator. And that was about 1998-99 through 2011. And during that time, I went through many training sessions, was educated in fire investigations. I went to a level in about 2002 where I became an instructor with the National Fire Academy, and I've been doing that 3 or 4 times a year. During that time, we train arson investigators not only how to investigate fires, but how to testify as expert witnesses. And so today is going to be a little bit about how you testify as an expert witness in arson cases and the obstacles you have to overcome to do that. It's not an easy field. Has anybody in here ever had a fire of any significance to their structure, car, or anything like that? Anybody? That's unusual. Okay, I got one back there. Everybody's seen fires. It's hard to look at that and say you can make heads or tails out of anything that's going on in that scene to say what started it, how it started, what the cause was, and if you find out the cause, what exactly or who exactly did that. That's what we're tasked with doing every day. And we try to do a good job of it, but I think you're going to see I had a printout of an article from the New Yorker, and it goes over the Todd Willingham case. And by the way, I invite questions. This is not going to be a real long session if you don't have some questions, and I hope you do. I love to interact a little bit, but I can be wordy, but this won't last long if we don't have some interaction. But Todd Willingham was a young man in Texas, and he had a fire in 1991. And during that fire, 3 of his daughters passed away. Immediately following that fire, there was an investigation. And to make a long story short, there was an investigation. He was accused of setting the fire, tried, convicted, put on death row, and in 2004 he was executed for that crime. During that time, that case was looked over several times from other experts. Now, the 2 people that originally investigated that fire had a long history in the military, had a long history in the fire service. And I'm not here to say whether they're right, wrong, or in between. I'm here to tell you a little bit about the obstacles that we have as being expert as arson investigators. And I really like to coin that as fire investigators. Not everything we investigate is arson. But the 2 investigators was very highly regarded in the community. People respected them. Matter of fact, they revered them, at least one of them, in a lot of different ways throughout the state. And they come up to their conclusions that Mr. Willingham set this fire. And they laid it all out. The fire, some of the evidence, and you can read the article. It's a long article, but it's worth reading. But if you look at the article, they come up with some things. They see pour patterns. So it makes sense if you see several different origins of a fire in a house. That leads you to a pretty good assumption, could be wrong, that was a set fire. You don't have a lot of accidental fires in 3 different places in a house. It's not going to happen. So we looked for multiple points, and that's the conclusion he came to. He saw evidence of ignitable liquids and took samples. He had a positive return on one of those, but it was by the front door. It was by an aluminum threshold, which had melted. And they took that sample and it came back positive for mineral spirits. Mineral spirits a lot of times in charcoal lighter fluid, things of that nature. That's the only place that any positive samples came back. The rest of them were negative. He also saw the pour patterns on the floors. Nothing came back positive. He saw some crazed glass. And it was crazed, and the assumption at that time from most arson investigators or fire investigators were if you see crazed glass, that's an indicator of an ignitable liquid. And he took all this, and he also took some, let's say, some behavioral patterns, or he didn't. Some other experts said the behavioral patterns were not typical of somebody that may have lost their loved ones, and said that's another reason why he set this fire. Long and short of it, it goes to trial, he's convicted, and now, after years of research and looking at fires and how they start, it's pretty much well thought that he may still have done this act. We don't know that. But the science that they were using to convict him on was really outdated. And I can tell you that's what we try as fire investigators is to overcome. And it's tough. It's a tough subject. But we do have ways we do it. We have materials. We have training that we can do that. And that's kind of what I'm going to go over today, kind of where we're at today. Is there any questions over the Todd Willingham case? Yes?
What's crazed glass?
Well, if you've seen a glass when you, on your windshield and something hits it and it just cracks, real tiny little cracks in it, that's crazed glass. And a lot of times when fires occur and you cool it down quickly with either a hose stream or something like that, it won't break out, but it will just craze and crack. It remains in place, but it's just crazy. Does that answer that for you? And we do use, and you'll find me, I'm sorry if I do, I use acronyms, I use terms that you may not be aware of. Please let me know if that occurs, because we have language that we talk about every day, and it's difficult. And if I do that, let me know. Well, why did we have to get better as investigators? Well, this is the reason why, the Todd Willingham case, and there's many like it. This is just one example. So what got us to be better experts? Well, most of you have been out in the field. We have many alumni here. I'm sure there's faculty, students, all that. And I'm sure I'm not going to give a lesson in case law. But what we came to as experts and what we have to adhere to is a couple of cases that came down. And Oklahoma has adopted the Daubert versus Merrill Dow standard. We have adopted that, and we use that. And if you want to get the temperature or the nerves going with the fire investigator or other fields, just tell them that they have to go to a Daubert hearing. Because when they do that, they're going to be questioned about everything that they've ever done in their field. And is that necessary? It absolutely is. Because we need to raise our game. We need to be better at it. And I think that this case has helped that. Notice the year of this. When did the Willingham case happen? 1991. I'm not saying that Willingham made Daubert come up because it had nothing to do with the fire, but I'm saying that's when the expert testimony, we were raising the level that they needed to come to court and be prepared for. And it laid out these principles that you have to do. And this isn't just for fires. This is every field. And it laid out empirical testing, whether it has been subject to peer review, and that is up for debate on what peer review is. Does anybody have any opinion as to, do I just let a friend of mine read it? Is that peer review? We need somebody with at least as much knowledge as we have, or greater, that's not just so, they're just not going to rubber stamp it to look at that and make sure that we have other opinion as to what kind of conclusions you're coming to. We have to know the known potential for error rate. That's pretty tough in the fire service. Can you duplicate any two fires? We have a fire at the school over here last week. Can we duplicate that fire? It's next to impossible. So you can do all the testing in the world, and you can have the same building, you can have the same layout, you can try to have the same materials, which is almost impossible. What other variables can you not duplicate?
Weather?
Weather has a big bearings on how fires react. Anybody see any big grass fires that last for days and days when the winds are 5 miles an hour or less? No. When wind gets up there, it goes all over the place, and we've seen that. So weather, we can't duplicate that. What's another factor with weather? Humidity has a big factor on how fires burn and how they go throughout a structure. So no matter how much testing we can do, we can't duplicate it. We can come close. There are scientific formulas, and we use those, but we can come close, but we can't duplicate it. We have different maintenance of standards and controls concerning its operation. The degree at which the theory and technique is generally accepted. What does that sound like, generally accepted? That's the Fry method, isn't it? So Daubert is really just taking Fry and taking it a step further is what it's doing. So we still have to look at general acceptance theory, but we have to add some things to it. And for us as investigators, we need to do more training, to do more testing, to go to different schools, and that's why I try to get to the National Fire Academy as much as I can to teach those investigators how to do that. I have testified in state court and federal court, both for arsons of all kinds, everything from first degree to fourth degree, everything from meth fires to intentionally set fires. And you have to be on your game a little bit to do that. So we're trying to educate the investigators. We have kind of like attorneys and myself have for statutes. We have NFPA 921 that came out coincidentally in the early 90s. And this lays out the standards, and it's not a standard because it says it's a guide, but it's basically our standard. Some states are starting to adopt it as a standard, and we have to follow the principles here. Now, it says in this book that you can't always follow the principles, but if you don't, you better have an explanation of why you don't, because you're going to get either in a Daubert hearing or on the stand, it's going to come up. So, this is kind of like our statute book. We have all kinds of other books that help us in the area of fire investigation. This is a big one. It's put out. Anybody ever heard of John DeHaan? He's pretty famous in the world of fire investigations. He's from California. He's got his PhD. He does a lot of testing. He's put out, this is the 7th edition. He did not write it. That's because it's called Kirk's. But every edition since then he has come up with. This is kind of like, I would say, an encyclopedia. Anytime we go to a fire, whether it's electrical in nature, whether it's intentionally set fire with ignited liquids, we'll go to this as a reference. Now, can you memorize everything in this? Absolutely not. Can't do it. Can you memorize everything in 921? No. You can't do it, but you've got to use it as a guide. We kind of go by National Fire Protection Association. If you hear me say NFPA, that's National Fire Protection Association. We also have qualifications for fire investigators. It's laid out in here what you need to do. What was one of the problems that, well, you guys didn't read the article. One of the problems in the New Yorker dealing with Todd Willingham was that one of the investigators was termed a certified fire investigator. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? Well, unfortunately, in our nation, the United States, I can go out in about a 20 to 40 hour course, get a certificate that says I'm a certified fire investigator. Does that make me an expert? No. On the other side of that, we have organizations like the International Association of Arson Investigators that put on classes, and they can certify you as a fire investigator. That's a whole different ballgame. You have to have been a fire investigator for a full-time job for 3 years. You have to have completed so many hours of expert testimony. You have to have passed a written test, which includes about 10 different textile books, dealing with auto fires, dealing with structure fires, wildland fires, all things of that nature. And then you have to pass a written test. That's a little bit different than a 20-hour course that says you're a fire investigator. So look, one of the things that was in the Willingham case is he said he was I think it was Mr. Fogg that said he was a certified fire investigator. You've got to look and see what that certification's for. And we do that in all fields, don't we? I mean, you can see the initials behind the name. It doesn't necessarily mean the same thing, although I think JD usually means the same thing most everywhere we go. But you see the initials, you need to develop it. We have rules. We have to go by the scientific method, okay? And every time I've gotten up on the stand, and if it's not a Daubert hearing, they're asking for my qualifications as an expert, they've asked me what the scientific method is. And this is in all fields. This isn't just fire. This is in all fields. And if you can go through that data, and it really makes sense with fires, you have a need. Well, the need for fires is just there's an occurrence. There's a fire. You define the problem. Every problem is going to be that we want to find out what the cause of that fire was. We want to do that. You collect the data, and that's when you get into all your interviews, your data that you collect as far as evidence, and that goes from everything from fire patterns. We take samples. We have evidence as far as the building construction goes. All of that is collecting the data. And we analyze that data. We look at it. What does it mean to us? And we develop why we think the fire started. That's developing the hypothesis. Then we have to go out and test it. Now, how is testing? Can we go out and duplicate fires? No. Have we had many hundreds and thousands of tests to look at? Yes, we have. And during that time, I can take what I've seen in the past, and that helps me on the test, the hypothesis. And I'll give an example. If I have seen cigarettes, which I have, ignite combustibles, and then I get another case, and I go out and I investigate that, and I determine, it was in a couch and it was in a little crevice, which you need some ventilation, and I determined that a cigarette started that fire. I don't have to go out and do that and duplicate that every time, because I've seen it happen. I've seen it hundreds of times. I've seen it in the testing atmosphere, and I've seen it in real life. So you don't have to test every fire on its own. So that you don't have to go out there and form a test on it, but if you want to, you can. There's facilities. ATF has facilities. We have facilities in Tulsa. We have them in Broken Arrow. We can test those things. So we try to do that. And if it all fits together and it's all working, we'll come up with our final hypothesis or our final conclusion. Now, what are those conclusions? How many causes of fires do we have? Does anybody know? It's laid out in NFPA 921. This isn't a statute question. This is a question that we only have 4 things we can determine a fire to have caused by. 4 things set out by the International Association of Arson Investigators. One of them is accidental. I think I have a slide for it. One of them is accidental, one of them is incendiary, one of them is undetermined, and one is natural. Let's talk about each one of those. Accidental is pretty easy. Okay, if I go in and we have, let's say, an appliance, and it's pretty apparent by all the fire patterns and all the evidence and the interviews that you conduct that there was, I don't know, a coffee maker that started the fire. And all the patterns match up with it. Did anybody do that on purpose? I mean, it could happen. You can rig coffee makers. I've done it. How can we eliminate that as an intentional fire? We can x-ray the coffee machine. We can see if it's been tampered with. If it has, we can tell. So absent any evidence that shows that that was a set fire, that's going to be an accident. Okay? And we have accidents each day. And we have those determinations. Unfortunately, we always can't come to that conclusion. And if there's any question in my mind, and any investigator in their right sense has an awful lot of undetermined fires, if they're not, then they're not telling the truth. If you get somebody on the stand that's an investigator and you ask them, you know, what are causes of fires? And they'll go through that list. They should know that. And then they come to the end. They say, well, how many undetermined fires have you had? And they say, oh, I don't ever have an undetermined fire. And you got somebody you want on the stand if you're the defense, because I can tell you that you can break them down pretty easily. Everybody's going to have undetermined fires. Incendiary fires are somebody by human cause set that fire. That's what incendiary means. Now, there's only one exception to that I know of in our statutes in Oklahoma, and that is under first-degree arson. Your intent to set a fire is not one of the elements when you're manufacturing a controlled substance. And if you've lived here in Tulsa very long, you know that we have issues with manufacturing methamphetamine. And in the past, you know, I've been in Broken Arrow for about 1.5 years. Before that, the previous 3 to 5 years, I probably investigated more meth fires than I care to ever see again. It's tragic how many we have and how many people have been hurt or killed from those. But the legislators thought that was so important, and most states require the intent part of it, malicious and willful intent. That's the only place they won't. Most states are starting to go to that, but I'm saying we have probably as bad a problem here in this community. And interestingly, they don't have near the problem in Oklahoma City, and as close as Oklahoma City is as we do. I don't know why that is. I wish I had the answers to it. I think it's getting better. To be honest with you, I don't know if it's getting better because the cooks are more knowledgeable on what they're doing, so they're having less fires, or if it's just starting to go away because we're holding people accountable. And if you've watched the news in the last few years, there's been significant sentencing on people that are found guilty of that because it is a dangerous activity. But as far as the arson statutes, first degree is burning of an occupied dwelling. That's pretty much it in a nutshell, besides the manufacturing. Second degree is the burning, intentional and malicious burning of an unoccupied dwelling. Third degree is burning of property. I believe there's a money amount. When you probably know dollars, or there's a money amount there that you have to be above for it to be third degree. And then fourth degree, which we have sometimes, is just attempted arson that doesn't quite make it. So generally that's not there because it usually burns something. Even if you're bad at it, it usually burns something. So we try to get away from that attempted. Every now and then there's a time that you don't burn whatever the money amount is. I can't remember if it's $50 or $100, but it's pretty low.
I had a fourth-degree arson case, and it was a drunk guy that was rolling around on his neighbor's lawn trying to light the grass with his lighter. and wasn't very successful. So.
Yeah, it happens. And natural, any examples of natural?
Lightning.
Lightning's a very good example. Any other ones? I'll give you the best example, and I have seen it 3 or 4 times. I know it happens. I've never seen it happen in an experiment, but I've seen videos of it. I know it happened. Spontaneous combustion. Anybody ever hear of it? There's a couple ways it can happen, okay? Vegetation, hay, things of that nature. You pile it up in a pile. If it gets just the right ventilation and temperature outside and the humidity is just right, it can start a fire. And it does occasionally. It doesn't happen very often. The more common spontaneous combustion would be the where you have linseed oil, which has to do with woodworks, when you're finishing wood with lacquers and things of that nature, varnishing and stuff. You pile the rags up, usually cotton rags, in a corner. Within a few hours, you may see some smoking, and I've seen it start a fire too. So that's spontaneous combustion. I'm always skeptical when somebody tells me about spontaneous combustion. So I have to investigate, but I've seen it, and it's happened. I think all fire investigators have a healthy amount of skepticism because we hear all kinds of stories. But I can tell you from an expert standpoint, we want to make sure that we put on the best product. I understand that there's a lot of myths out there. Some of the myths that was evident in the Willingham case, and you'll see some fire investigators that'll say if there's spalling on the contract. Anybody know what spalling on the contract on concrete is? You ever see concrete that's got little divots out of it and it's all over the place and it looks like it's just kind of turned into mush underneath it and stuff? That's spalling of concrete. For years and years, fire investigators, without any testing, would come out and they would say, if there's spalling of concrete, they had an ignitable liquid there. No doubt about it. They set that fire, they put it on there. That's a myth. The crazed glass is a myth. Now, I'm not telling you that it doesn't always happen or it can't ever happen. Yeah, you can put an ignitable liquid on substance and glass and right there at it, and it can cause crazing, but you can also do that with just normal wood, paper, normal combustibles. So just because you go up and you look and there's crazed glass, it doesn't mean there's a ignitable liquid. But that was the myth for years and years. What else? You go up on a bed and you see the springs on a bed. Of course, everything's going to burn away from those springs, right? You have the springs. They used to be, when they get smashed down and you don't have that if you want to say, that air in between those springs, they just compress. They used to say that was ignitable liquids. And that was years and years. I mean, I got her in the fire service in 1984, and that's what they told us for years and years just because it happened. Those are myths. I have a couple more. Oh, I already mentioned the multiple origins of fire. Why, in the Willingham case, do you think that he went to the conclusion or the assumption that there was a set fire from multiple origins? Are there exceptions to that? I'll answer the question. There are. And here's the biggest problem with investigating fires overall, is we have a thing called flashover. And flashover is if you had this room, okay, and these tables and chairs were on fire. You're going to come to a point that if you have enough combustible material here, and we probably do, if everything was on fire, that room will be totally engulfed in fire. That's called flashover. And you can watch videos of it. And when it gets to the condition where everything in here is on fire enough, it's not an explosion, but it's almost like one because everything's going to be coming out of every exit that we have here, okay? And it's going to be going like you've never seen. If you see the pictures of fires, usually on houses that happen at night, and that fire's coming out of the eaves and it's coming out of the windows, that room is in flashover. Okay? When flashover occurs, unfortunately for the fire investigator, it skews almost all the patterns in there. Now, can we still investigate that? Yes. Can you find samples that may be positive with ignitable liquids? Yes. so we can come to conclusions. But as far as pour patterns, this carpet that's right here, and you see some over by the front door, you'll see substances that have been on the floor, right? When that goes to flashover, when you put that out, those are going to look exactly like a pour pattern would look with ignitable liquids. You're also going to see several places in here, whether it's the chair against the wall, whether it's these chairs against the wall, will look like different points of origin. And when I say points of origin, I would say that wall is going to be more severely burnt when they put it out. And you're going to look, and we always say that look for the lowest burn, and it's going to look like you got a point of origin over there. It would have what we would call a V pattern. The fire burns up and out. It always has, and it always will. Difficulty is over here it's going to look the same way. And maybe against the back wall it's going to be the same way. And if somebody doesn't say, hey, we had some material here that could have caused this at the same time as flashover, they're going to say, we have 3 or 4 different points of origin here. And then the reasonable and logical conclusion is going to be, must have been a set fire. That's a myth. It's a myth. Now, is it something we can look at in a normal house fire that the fire department gets there and they get the fire out and that room's burned up, but it's pre-flashover? We can look at those V patterns. We can look at those areas of the carpet, and they may be very conclusive as to what we come to. But in flashovers, that kind of skews the whole scene. You got to be aware of that. Testing's gone on the last 5 years. It's a different world. So we are up against those kind of things, and there's a lot of myths still out there. I think, where was it you said there was a case in Pennsylvania here recently? We still have those investigators out there. Are we trying to educate them and help them? Absolutely. Are we perfect? No, we're not. We're not. So, if anybody wants to ask me any questions about arsons, arson fires, my area has been here in Tulsa. I probably wouldn't discuss people. I do know I've been in contact with a lot of the ATF agents. For a while I was an ATF task force officer about the fire over here at the school. I kind of know how that went, but I won't give out the causes even though they've kind of come out with it. But we can talk about any kind of fires that you've had or seen or expert testimony, whatever you want to do. Anybody have any questions? Judge?
Talking about the school fire without getting into any of the details, and I know you can't, what are the investigators looking at? What's their methodology? What are they trying to do to determine the point of origin?
Okay, in this case, and in big cases in Tulsa in the past, the staff in Tulsa is about 10 investigators for the whole city, and they're split up by shifts. Well, when there's a large loss, and usually that's about over $1 million, which this school probably qualifies for, we have some good friends in the ATF, they will get their national response team and they will bring them here, and there's probably anywhere from 10 to 25 people that they send here. And what they will do is have assigned different tasks to all those people. And some of them will be the scene investigation, some of them will be doing interviews. There'll be a forensics team that's taking evidence. There'll be all kinds of responsibilities, and they'll split up. The scene investigators in general, our methodology when we investigate all fires is outside in, largest to smallest. Okay, so if we're investigating a house fire or a school fire, we're going to go all the way around that outside, and we're going to look at everything that's going on there. And we're just going to work our way in to see where we can kind of narrow down to where we think that point of origin is. We can use things like eyewitness testimony to give us a clue. We can use things like burn patterns, which is mostly what we'll do when we're doing the scene itself. We can use video, which is very good. We'll go to TV stations that get there early, and if they've got fire coming out a window on the east side, we're going to eventually say, and then that's the first place that they saw the fire come out. That's kind of where we kind of clue that we're going to end up. But that doesn't necessarily mean that, because sometimes if you have more fuel in one room and then the other, it can start in this room that has less fuel. And by fuel, I mean furniture or anything like that. But it'll travel to the side to where the most fuel is and to where the ventilation is. And if you have a window that's open or some kind of ventilation, that fire is going to travel that direction. And that's kind of what they look at as far as seeing. They go from the outside to inside to the largest area to the smallest area. And that's, in roughly, that's kind of how they work. But they're all doing it in concert. If they have 20 people there, they're looking at different things, and they're coming back and constantly communicating. We don't always have that luxury as far as the public sector goes. We only have so many resources. The nice thing about the ATF, they have a lot of resources and a lot of testing. But we do a good job in Tulsa and Broken Arrow trying to do the same kind of things, but we know we help each other and try to help each other. And that's the reason they're able to come to a quick conclusion like they have in this case. I will tell you this, without getting into the causes and stuff, what happened in that fire and the reason the firefighters were burned and injured, thankfully not fatally or real bad. They do have to have some grafts on their hands and things of that nature, and the equipment works. But it was because of, everybody's heard it, and I know it kind of sends all kinds of signals, but it was because of a backdraft, and it was not one that could have been predicted. There are signs and symptoms to backdrafts, and if anybody doesn't know what a backdraft is I'll give you an example. If this room was superheated with gases and it's hot, it's been burning for a while, but it doesn't have enough oxygen, and you got to have oxygen to sustain itself, the fire's going to go down, and it's going to still be hot for a period of time, probably for up to an hour. It can still be hot. Smoke will be going under the places that it can, out the ventilations. And during that period, when it's hot enough and it has those gases in there, if you enter air or ventilation, it's going to have an explosion. And unlike a flashover that I spoke of, backdrafts do cause an explosion. And that's kind of what happened to them. They had some hidden spaces where some heated gases and stuff. Most of the time, those are predictable. They're not always, and that's what happened here. It wasn't predictable. Yes?
I know one time the fire department had beagles they used. Do you use dogs?
I'm glad you asked that. Generally speaking, when I was at Tulsa, we had 3 canine arson dogs, and we have the handlers. It's a very good tool, and that's what it is. It's just a tool, because the dog cannot testify. But what the dog will do is point out where they think or where they determine, we call them alert, to where the ignitable liquids are, and they test them all the time. And the handlers are sent to different kinds of schools. Specifically, ours went to ATF school, but you have other schools that do it, and they're on a reward system, so every time that they alert, they get a little bit of food. And we've had those in Tulsa for years. The last one passed away about 2 years ago. They do not have one now. I don't know of anybody else in the state that has one. I know the ATF has one, and they probably brought one this last week to look at some things. But they are used. We don't have any right now. And as far as being accurate, it's probably about as close to perfect as you can get. In the times that they aren't, I suspect, and we did some studies, the Tulsa lab did some studies, and I think it was like 98% success rate that we brought samples in. The times they weren't, their machines may be less accurate than the dog is. And I don't know that for a fact, but they are useful tools, and we have used them in the past, and they're out there. So, good question. Yes?
Do you have any experience working with the Chemical Safety Board on any losses?
Not the Chemical Safety Board themselves. They haven't come out, but we do have resources that we'll use if we see areas that we need help in. I'll give the example of the meth fires. We go out, and as fire investigators, and I say we because I did it for so long, but our investigators will go out, and it's very easy or not difficult to identify products and things that are in those things. But we are not, as fire investigators in Tulsa area, they may be someplace, able to testify in court expertise in meth itself. So we asked the Tulsa Police Department Special Investigations Division to come in, and we will testify on the fire, and we will testify where it started and what started it. But as far as the meth itself, the Tulsa Police Department would handle that part of it. And we've worked hand in hand with them for the past, many years, and it's worked out pretty well. But as far as the chemical, I have not worked with them. Yes, sir.
There have been a number of times where the fire department purposely ventilates a building
Mhm.
during the fire. How
Yes,
does
sir.
that affect then your investigation?
It can, and we have classes continuously on what the fire suppression efforts do to hinder our efforts. But they have to do some of those things, and they can't keep that because the atmosphere is toxic, it's dangerous, they need to get that. But we understand that, and most of the time, luckily, in this area, we have investigators that are on the scene when those kind of actions are taking place. So we can watch them, we can see what effect that has on the structure and things of that nature. That doesn't happen all over the place. If you're in a rural community, who's going to investigate your fires? Does anybody know? Is it going to be the local volunteer fire department?
State, probably.
State fire marshal. Does anybody know how hard a state fire marshal works? They probably have investigators in the state of Oklahoma. I don't think they have over 5 to 7 investigators to cover the whole state. It's amazing that they can, do what they do. The problem with that is not how good of an investigator they are, because they're all very qualified. The problem is that you think it's better to investigate a fire right when it happens or 2 or 3 days later when they can get there. And that's what happens to the state fire marshal's office many times, and it's not their fault, but it's very tough to do. But to answer your question, ventilation does affect the fire patterns in there, and we try to take that into account, and we try to get there as fast as we can. Yes?
Can you touch on methods or challenges of evidence preservation? You touched on it a little bit already, but just some things you see.
Yes, and when we're taking samples, we do the best we can, and this is an area that we are getting better at, and I can tell you people in this area try to do it, but we go from fire to fire. We wear the same gear. We got the same boots on and things like that. If we don't do a great job of decontamination, we're going to get on the stand and they're going to ask about the methods of transfer of evidence. So we try to do a good job of washing all of our equipment and stuff. We also go to classes on evidence recovery. We take photographs probably ad nauseum, so we can go through that. We always have gloves on when we take evidence. And when we go to court, not only do we want to make that chain of evidence complete, and usually the defense will make sure that we do that, we also want to paint a picture of what we saw in there. So we not only have the evidence, whether it's the tools of the dog, the canines, and we have reports of that. And when they alert, and I'm saying alert, it's kind of neat to watch, but when they alert, they'll sit right where they're at and they'll start scratching right there where they think, well, okay, I'll take a sample right here. And that's what we'll do. We'll take pictures before that. But they write reports for those things. The biggest samples we take, most of the time, are appliances, so we can either x-ray them or have an electrical engineer look at them to see if there's any tampering stuff. And the other is just take samples of the fire debris to see if we have ignitable liquids. That's the 2 biggest ones that we'll do. But if there's other things, we'll take those too, because you don't want to get up on the stand and you have pictures all over the place. I smile because I've seen it happen. And when I go and teach at the National Fire Academy, what we do is we do a mock trial for the fire investigators. And if anybody knows, testifying in front of a jury or somebody that hasn't been to fires is one thing. And that's, you feel like you may know that area a little bit better than most, and you feel pretty good about it. But at the National Fire Academy, everybody's an investigator there. You can't fool them. So, and that's kind of what's fun for me, because I'm the attorney, which I've never been a defense attorney. But I'll get up there and I can call them on things that they're doing because I know it a little bit. So in that respect, when you go through class up there, or the interview, interrogation, courtroom testimony, if they can kind of survive that, when they get in the courtroom, hopefully it'll be a little bit easier for them. So we try to prepare them for those things, and if they don't do the correct decontamination, or they don't take and have good chain of control through your evidence, then they're going to be questioned about it. And they need to be more prepared for that. So, yes.
When you find a defect in an appliance, or you find that in a particular appliance is the origin of a fire, do you always look into the appliance to see if it's been tampered with, or is it kind
Not
of
always.
circumstantial?
Not always, and I'll tell you how that happens. If we're satisfied after our whole investigation, and it requires a lot of interviews and looking through the scene, we're satisfied with that. We may come to a conclusion. It may be undetermined, or it may be accidental. But what's going to usually come to this kind of, I haven't spoke a lot on the difference between public and private investigations. Usually there's going to be an insurance company coming after there than a private fire investigator. They have a lot more resources, and they're going to take that. Now, what we get into, and if we don't maintain that appliance, or we don't have it in the proper setting, and they don't get a chance to do that, it's called spoliation. I'm sure everybody's heard of it, and we're going to get in trouble for it. So we try to preserve those things, and that's why I'm saying I don't want to get up on the stand and think it's a coffee maker and something else is on that. Say a can opener on that shelf, on that cabinet, and somebody say, "Well, did you eliminate the can opener?" No, I didn't think of that. So you don't want to get caught with that. So we try to, but we don't take every one. But you can usually, if we think it started it, we're going to tell the insurance company, and then you get into all kinds of rules of arson immunity letters and things like that. But we don't communicate without having those. But that's kind of what we do on the appliances. Yes, sir.
Out of the 4 causes up here, what is the general breakdown of the percentage? 10% incendiary, 10% accidental?
I don't have the accurate, but I can go just on memory. A ballpark, I would say accidental probably comes in there around 50 to 60%. Incendiary is probably at least 20 to 25%, and you get the other ones, probably 15 or 20%. Undetermined, I would say if somebody's got less than a 10% undetermined rate, they're just making some things up. I'll just be honest with you. That's fine. There's great investigators out there, but I'm sorry. There's some that you just can't make a call on. Judge.
You talked about analysis of the samples, the forensic investigation.
Yes, sir.
Analysis. Does Broken Arrow have their own facilities to do that, or do you have to rely on another?
No, sir. We'll either send them to the state, OSBI, or we'll send them to Tulsa. One or the other. That's what. And that's kind of the way that the Tulsa Fire Department did it too. They would use their own lab, but there were occasions that they'd send something to OSB if they thought it could get back. OSB, Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation. I know everybody knows that, but I that's what we do in Broken Arrow and Tulsa. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question about forest fires. We apparently have an epidemic this summer and fall of them, and every once in a while you read in the newspaper that they found somebody that started the fire. Is that something that it's kind of somebody has turned somebody in, or is there a way?
Well, there are ways to find the origin, and if you hear investigations, usually you'll hear terms origin and cause. Years ago, and I know it's just a little thing, but they said cause and origin, but you can't find the cause until you get the origin. So it's origin and cause, and there's ways in forest fires because of wind and all those things that you can find the origin, and then once you get to where it started, then you start looking for evidence. Who was there? What was there? Was it a camp? Was there a camp around there? That's when they'll start looking for people, tire tracks, any of those kind of things. So that's kind of the way they'll go about the investigation. You hit on it. We do have some problems with wildland fires. We haven't always had that. The last couple of summers have been pretty exceptional for us. But unfortunately, we still hear an awful lot around the nation of, and we had somebody down by 10 killer. I'm sorry. I hate to say this because it's my own industry and I love the fire service, but we have a lot of volunteers and paid fire department people that want to see those kind of things. I don't know if which attracts which. I just know that we're seeing some of that, and we watch that pretty close. But we do have a problem with wildland fires. There is a way to investigate them. There are investigators that, if you want to say, have that specialty, and they'll bring them in from time to time. But it takes a lot of legwork, and not just where the origin is, but interviews and things of that nature. And a lot of times it does boil down to, I saw so-and-so, Yes. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
I've heard that investigating a home fire, maybe one approach is seeing what's not there. That maybe people can't find any certain things that
Sure.
you're going to burn your own home. I'm gonna get that out of there, because I don't wanna lose
I
that.
could-
Is there any truth to that?
Absolutely, and I could give you story after story about, we do look in closets and things of that nature to see if the biggest part of clothes are missing. And the good thing about the fire department is we have exigent circumstances to be there, so we can look for those causes, whereas you don't need a search warrant until the fire's out and a reasonable time to investigate. So we look at those things, and I could give you some fires that we did see that some things missing, and that's the reason we zeroed in on what's going on here. I don't think I'm violating anything here. There was a physical fitness center fire over by the 51st and Yale area that we identified a few things missing from that, and I don't know if it was legitimate or not, but that led to an arrest eventually, and that's kind of what clued us in the first place. And there's other ones. There's all kinds of people don't want to lose their valuables, you know, their pictures, their clothes, those family heirlooms, and if they still have those, that's not very good thought on their part. So, yes, ma'am.
If a person were looking ahead and say they took out all their best clothes and they went to a thrift shop and stocked their closets with clothes.
They do it. They do it all the time.
Family, can you get behind that and anticipate someone might be thinking ahead like that and do that?
You mean catch it before it happens in the thrift store? That's pretty tough. But I can tell you they do that. I won't want to say it's all the time, but they do it. And we usually, that's one of the first things we look at. If you're looking for down the list of evidence that we want to look for, the scene examination, that's part of it. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, can you actually go behind and determine that they have looked ahead, that they have...
Oh, sure. You go to those establishments. If you have, and we've done that, if you see receipts or anything like that to a thrift store or something like that, you go straight to them. Absolutely. And that's just part of being a good investigator, following up on those things you can. We have found things at pawn shops, things of that nature that people were taking. So those are good avenues to look at for investigations. Yeah, we've used them. Kind of depends on what's laying around the house. We're pretty nosy because we're looking for what caused the fire. Now, we're not going to find a billfold and start going through the billfold. We would never do that. But anything that's in plain sight or anything that's in those that we think that could be a reason why that caused the fire, anything we'll take a look at. And if it's scrutinized in court as what's admissible and warrants and stuff, it'll all work itself out. That's part of the system. Yes, ma'am.
What's the criteria for the ATF to get involved? You've mentioned them a lot. I mean,
well, they have jurisdiction. And that's because I have some close friends and I was associated with it. They have certified investigators, and they're a federal agency. They make their services available to everybody in the state. If a person in Miami, Oklahoma had a fire and they were at the local jurisdiction, whether it's paid or volunteer, needed some help, they can call the ATF office and ask them for help. Now, they're not necessarily going to get the national response team and have 20 or 25 people there, but they'll get a certified investigator to come out there and look at it. And people do that all across the state. They're a pretty good resource, and I think they do that across the nation. They become members of the Oklahoma chapter of the International Association of Arson Investigators. As a matter of fact, the ATF agent, until just here real recently in Tulsa, that's a certified fire investigator, and there's only one of them, his office was at the Tulsa Fire Department for our investigation. So, and he still checked in with his, ATF. So there's a pretty close connection, at least in this area, and that's probably why I bring them up a lot. And they've had a big bearing on us, myself included, on training, going to the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center and going to advanced arson investigation classes and things of that nature. So they've been beneficial to me in this department, in this state, and they try to do that. Amazingly, I have taken this almost all the way to 1 o'clock, and I didn't think I'd take it 5 minutes. So thank you very much. I do like the question and answer more than I like the other stuff, but I wanted to give you a background of why I think it's important for us to be qualified as experts. And if we're not doing our job as investigators no matter where you're from, we need to be held accountable. And that's why there's a movement. It's not perfect, but there's a movement to try to get better at our craft. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.